At the age of 30, Dr. Aurelius Solano withdrew from the shores of the Lacuna Institute and undertook a decade-long sojourn in the high alpine laboratory he had carved into the granite flank of Mount Eos. There, removed from all human society, he cultivated both his empirical observations and the inner workings of his own thought. He devised instruments to measure the sun's radiance upon his sheltered terrace, and he trained two bioengineered companions, an avian automaton he dubbed the Eagle, and a sensor unit he named the Serpent, to record the minute fluctuations of heat and light that penetrated his study. For 10 years, neither his experiments nor his solitude had lost their allure. Each dawn his instruments awaited the solar influx, and each evening they recorded its ebb into the terrestrial underlayers he had hollowed beneath the mountain's root. Yet at the close of that decade, Solano underwent a deep inner reversal. His empirical data, once a source of pride, now felt like an overabundance of collected honey, stifling the biological hive of his intellect. The very models he had constructed to distribute insight among his fellow researchers now lay stagnant, like stored archives without a circuit of dissemination. In that moment of transformation, he recognized a necessity. The data, like the overflowing vessel of a laboratory flask, demanded release. It was no longer sufficient to isolate knowledge within the mountain, or to preserve it in cold registers. The systems he had studied, the economic inequities of the global city-states, the oscillating fortunes of the scientifically disenfranchised, required that his findings descend into the depths of common life. Accordingly, Solano dismantled his last set of calibrating mirrors and sealed his laboratory instruments in hermetically protected casings. He resolved to undertake what the social theorists of the age dubbed the fall, a movement structurally analogous to the sun's passage beneath the ocean horizon, whereby it continues to cast indirect radiance upon the abyssal plains of the deep. This was the moment of sublation, the preservation of his rigorous empirical work through its conversion into a broader project of public transformation. His method would remain scientific, dedicated to precise measurement and rigorous philosophy, but its purpose would now be self-negating, insofar as it surrendered its purity to the tumult of human affairs. Thus equipped with nothing more than his conceptual frameworks, and accompanied by his faithful automata, Dr. Solano set forth from the summit at dawn. His mind, once fixated on the abstraction of stellar constants, now turned toward the concrete contradictions of human societies below, the joy of the impoverished when enfranchised through scientific education, the folly of the ostensibly wise when bereft of humility, and the latent potential for regeneration that arises when knowledge is poured forth unreservedly. In his wake, the sealed flasks of data would open, and the lessons of a decade's solitary thinking would flood across public fora, bearing the reflected brilliance of that most tranquil and generous of stars. At the moment when Dr. Aurelius Solano's boots first crunched the pine needle carpet of the subalpine woodland, he was alone, but fate had arranged otherwise. As he made his methodical descent, he emerged into a clearing where a solitary figure stood beneath the dappled light. Elder Ibrahim Khan, once a high commissioner in the Global Science Council, now a hermit who had renounced all institutional trappings. Khan, having abandoned his glass-paneled sanctum to forage the forest floor for rare mycorrhizal specimens, perceived at once the unmistakable bearing of his fellow wayfarer. In that silent instant, unfolding without formal exchange of words, Solano felt the weight of Khan's recognition. The elder's eyes, once accustomed to the sterile glow of conference projectors, now mirrored the quiet wisdom of the woodland depths. Khan had known Solano in another guise, a decade past, when the young scholar had first brought his ashes of intellectual ambition to these mountains. Now, as the sun's slanted beams traced Solano's path downwards, the elder's unspoken question arose. Was this the same thinker, now transfigured, who dared to carry the conflagration of scientific truth into the tangled valleys of human society? Would the conflagration be welcomed, or would it be condemned as an act of arson? In the absence of direct speech, Solano's intent became clear through his measured gait and the glint of resolve in his eyes. He carried no torch of destruction, but the living flame of empirical insight poised to ignite collective renewal. Khan sensed this. His posture shifted from a wary sentinel to that of the contemplative interlocutor. He recalled his own renunciation, how, driven by an overabundant compassion for humanity's woes, he had retreated until only the love of an abstract divinity remained. Man is an imperfect vessel, and too fragile to bear the weight of unbridled knowledge, his silent lament seemed to say. Yet Solano offered no charity, no alms to the passers-by of civilization. His purpose was neither to bestow mere cures nor to demand supplication. Instead, he brought a gift of reconstruction, a corpus of data fully indexed and ready to be reassembled into new frameworks of social praxis. He would not cede his intellect to beggars, for he was not impoverished of spirit. Nor would he cower behind hermit's cloister. His insights must flow outward and be accepted on their own merit. Khan regarded Solano's intention with a mixture of admiration and admonition. He knew how distrustful the townsfolk could be of lone figures bearing treasures. Their rumor-haunted streets harbored suspicions of midnight thieves rather than heralds of progress. He felt the pull of his old caution. Better to remain among beasts, he had once thought, where authenticity went unquestioned. Yet as he observed Solano's taut composure and the subtle, almost imperceptible hum of the serpent's sensors concealed within Solano's coat, Khan recognized in him a dialectical necessity, the necessity of transformation of solitary wisdom into communal struggle. In that unvoiced dialogue, the two shared a smile, the impish mirth of youthful explorers, even as the elder sensed the deeper tragedy yet unrevealed to Solano. For the greatest astonishment awaited when Solano discovered that the central postulate of his public address, that the old deity of absolute certainty had perished in the crucible of modern critique, remained unknown to nearly all who called themselves believers. And so as Solano resumed his fall, each step carried him further into the teeming contradictions of human society, poverty and wealth, folly and wisdom, suspicion and hope. Behind him, the sealed flasks of his alpine laboratory clustered like newborn stars, ready to burst open and cast their light upon the darkened corridors of the human heart. And within Solano's own mind, the closing thought crystallized. How astounding, how tragically conceivable that the death of God had yet to reach the ears of those who proclaimed his everlasting presence. In the outskirts of the sylvan border town, where the last pines gave way to cobblestones and workshops, Solano encountered a bustling square alive with anticipation. A crowd thronged around an engineered performance platform. Promised was a kinetic demonstration of human balance and control by a next-generation biomechanics troupe. Solano's arrival went unnoticed at first, but his presence exerted a subtle gravitational pull on the assembly. Where they had expected mere spectacle, his reputation as an emissary of transformative science lent the moment unexpected gravitas. Ascending a simple dais, Solano paused as if calibrating an unseen sensor, then began to project his voice, not in oratory, but as an unfolding argument. He spoke of man as both the culmination of past processes and the obsolescent precursor to a superior form of being, the superhuman. In the dialect he favored, humanity had given rise to its own contradiction in the form of its limited self-consciousness, and now stood on the cusp of a merger in which biological and technological potentials would merge into a new ontological category. No longer mere subjects of evolution, humans would become architects of a post-evolutionary reality.
He reminded them that as the apes once provoked laughter or pity in early humans, so would current humanity appear grotesquely primitive to their own descendants. Every drive toward conservation of existing norms, every clinging to inherited moral codes, risked reducing life to a stagnant archive. What is your intellect, Solano insisted, if not a crossbreed of organic neuron and artificial algorithm? And what are your values if they do not catalyze a radical revaluation of all prior valuations? His tone was neither scolding nor celebratory, but diagnostic, as though he were reading the vital signs of civilization and prescribing an urgent course correction. In rich detail, he described the superhuman as the great sea, capable of receiving the polluted current of humanity without contamination, an entity whose cognitive capacities would transform joy, reason, virtue, justice, and compassion from mere satisfactions into vectored forces propelling an unprecedented flowering of collective self-realization. He traced the pivotal moment of this emergence to the hour of great disenchantment, when individuals recognize the insufficiency of happiness, morality, and sympathy as they exist, and instead embrace their negation as the crucible of creative renewal. All the while, behind him, the biomechanics troupe readied their performance, a slender wire stretched across the plaza, bioluminescent stabilizers glinting at each anchor point. Yet as the first acrobats stepped onto the wire, the crowd fell silent, no longer expecting simple entertainment. They sensed that this gesture, their collective attention fixed on a single figure poised between ascent and fall, mirrored Solano's message, that true mastery lay not in maintaining the status quo, but in daring to traverse the void between what is and what could be. When at last applause erupted, it was not solely for the acrobat's grace, but for the vision he had unwittingly embodied. Solano descended the dais, leaving behind a palpable tension in the air. The question of whether they would persist in comfortable mediocrity or venture toward the realization of the superhuman now hovered over the marketplace like a silent encore demanding their own response.